in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest to our interview series, Veracelle Vega. She is the Chief People Officer at Resident Home. Veracelle, how are you?
Hi, how are you, Christina? Thanks so much for having me on.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Just learned that we're neighbors.
I know, amazing.
Would love to hear a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and this can be anything in the world, but what has recently brought you joy?
Sure. And by the way, when I was looking at the question of joy before, and it just like the first thing that popped out, I'm going to jump right into my puppy, then I'll go back to myself. But in the midst of, I think over the past year, like many folks too, we recently got a puppy that is now, oh my goodness, 1 year old. He's a toy Aussie and he just brings us joy and light. And I have 3 teenagers. I live in Brooklyn, like Christina, 3 kids. We've been navigating this, what this post-COVID universe looks like. My pronouns are she and her as well. My name is pronounced Veracelle, just like Duracell. And when I say it like that, nobody forever forgets it. But I love what I do. I have been Chief People Officer at Resident Home for almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
It's been the fastest 2 years of my life in startup world. It's probably like, 90 years per se, but we are going by lightning speed. I am loving every single minute of it, and specifically any opportunity that I get to talk about culture and culture transformation. I jump at the chance. So thanks so much for having me on.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself and your family. And it seems like you really enjoy working at Resident Home as well from our previous conversations too. How do you think your really personal journey has led you to be the Chief People Officer there?
Sure. So I'll start from not 5th grade, but maybe from college.
Okay.
And then go from there. It's interesting. I think over the past 20 something plus years, HR has absolutely transformed. I remember as a kid, and this is going like way back, if you went to department stores, there was usually a little sign on the door that said personnel. And then you would go in there and you just like fill out some forms, and maybe the questions were, when can you start, name, address, W-2, and that was like kind of it. So very reactionary. And HR has absolutely 100% evolved, and really being this right hand as a business partner to the business over the past, I want to say even dramatically over 20 years. But
Yeah.
my journey of everything that has led to my absolute dream job here as Chief People Officer at Resident Home. I actually thought I wanted to go into the Foreign Service.
Oh, okay.
And I actually studied government. I studied international relations. I thought I wanted to be a Foreign Service officer. My first job out of college, actually, I taught English as a second language in Japan.
That's amazing.
And I was a teacher. Yeah, and I was a teacher for a while. Thought this was going to be kind of my taste into the international arena. I loved it, but in my heart, I would say that, you know what, I like this teaching stuff, and I do like the international, but I think there's something else out there. I just don't know what it is. So it's interesting. It's almost like, it's almost like trial by error of like things that kind of lead you to where your career journey is. And so I went back to grad school. I studied public administration at Villanova University with the intent of going into the government. But it was there that I took an HR class, and I had never heard of HR before. I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. And it's all involved with people, and
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh, maybe this is, and again, through trial and error, I didn't even kind of realize what it is. And so I ended up doing after I graduated from Villanova, oddly enough, and you want to talk about marriage of careers, I was in the government, and I actually had an assignment with the Social Security Administration, so government, and I was in the personnel department, and I was a personnel policy specialist. I remember this, and I had a client group of, I want to say like 700 people up and down the East Coast, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is so small. But hindsight is 2020, because I don't think I've ever supported like 700 before. But it was there that it kind of launched my career into HR.
Hmm.
And I ended up staying at the Social Security Administration for 6 years.
Wow.
And I like to say that it was there that I became a classically trained HR generalist,
Okay.
all things under the sun HR. And then after a couple of years, I did a complete pivot, and then I went into television and entertainment for 10 years. So I was in the television space, supporting the corporate groups in HR. And I loved it, loved every single bit of it. I think it really kind of rounded out my HR experience. It was there, and there's a point to my story in this, Christina, of getting to where I am
I believe
right
you.
now, but you have to start, but you have to start from the back. But when I was in media and television, every single time that there would be kind of a startup group, and the leaders there needed an HR person to kind of help them put the team in place, kind of get, lay the foundations of what the team is going to look like. I would always kind of put my hand up for these assignments, and I realized, oh, this is really interesting. I like being that connector to senior leaders and helping, like, let's build the best team possible. I didn't even quite understand what I was, at the time, of the importance of building high performance teams, but that's exactly what I was helping to do. So I really like that. And then the opportunity came about 6 years ago. I was perfectly content what I was doing and staying in television, but an opportunity arose to be in a startup, and I have been in the startup space ever since. I love, love, love the hustle, the grit, the fast pace moving aspects of it. And I've been in a couple of startups, and all roads have kind of led to where I am today. I remember when a recruiter who I had known for a long time reached out to me. He's like, yeah, there's this mattress company, and they're looking for somebody to build out all their HR for them. And I'm like, mattresses. Like, and at the time I remember thinking, like, I think the typical response, at least even 2 years ago, when it's dramatically changed, of mattresses, is that, like, you go to a store, you kind of like roll around in it, then you have to figure, like, do I buy it from there? But like most things in e-commerce, and specifically in D2C, like buying things on your phone, click of a button,
Yeah.
that the less and less, even more so over the past year with the pandemic, less and less of the brick and mortar, which is still in their stores, and really moving into D2C. So I love what I do. We have the best products out there. The heart of everything that we do lies in having a good night's sleep. So so if we are not well rested, we're not doing a good job out there. So the mattress industry too is extremely crowded. And I want to say that over the past 5 years that we've been in existence, we've really inched our way to the top. And we're extremely proud of that.
Yeah.
And not only that, it makes my heart sing when I remember when it was probably a couple months ago, and I was kind of walking outside my apartment building, and I saw one of our mattress boxes out there. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know. There's just something about being really part of something, and really being part of something that is, I don't want, just not revolutionary, but like, wow, I helped to bring that to somebody's doorstep because I am helping the team in the background
Yeah.
try to have their best performance possible. There was something just incredibly cool about that. So all roads have led to where I am today, and we're growing by leaps and bounds, and I'm having a great time. So that's kind of my long story, Christina, in a nutshell, of how I am, how I came to be here.
I mean, I think context is really important. So I definitely appreciate you sharing your story of how you got into this space. And also, it sounds like, you didn't graduate from college and think, I'm going to go into HR, I'm going to be a chief people officer, because it doesn't sound like a linear career path. And you've worked in so many different not departments, but also just like startups to entertainment.
Yeah.
What do you value most in your coworkers?
That's a great question for me, and kind of the people that even Mike, like, one, I can't talk without talking about my team, and I am just blessed to have an amazing team who really are specialized. It's almost like they're super, like, a question that I love to ask a lot in interviews when I'm interviewing HR people is like, what is your superpower? And
Yeah.
what I mean by that, the HR wheelhouse is so vast, And it's really, really easy to lean into hiring people with the same kind of expertise that you have.
Sure.
And I think that, and it's just like people just gravitate toward that. But I actually look for the opposite. I like to bring on folks in my team who have different experiences, have different skill sets that can absolutely fill in like areas that I may have gaps in, because
Absolutely.
and I think as the more you go throughout your career, you cannot be that tactical specialist in everything. Like you have
Right.
to bring on folks with different experiences. Like everybody, like my team knows, like don't ask me about, like I'm not an Excel, I'm not an Excel person, nor do I claim to. There's a reason I don't do numbers, but I can sort an Excel street, no problem. But I would rather gravitate toward folks that like, I love metrics. I am so lucky to have a team that there's different complementary areas that I think we can
Mhm.
all like learn from each other. So in my team specifically, there's all different sorts of, I want to say, HR superpowers that we have,
Right.
to combine as one. Now, in terms of, the kind of talent we have too, I think it's important, and something that I tell our leadership team too, like don't hire folks that have the same skill set as you, specifically the further up you go on that, your career chain, you have to have folks that have, that can offer something else and bring something else to the table, because at some point you just cannot be all things to all people all
Yeah.
the time.
I think it's
And so
important.
exactly. So the diversity and skill set is something that, I think we pride ourselves on, because it just lends to this beautiful rainbow of experiences that can, at the end of the day, push to have greater culture. So
Yeah.
it's something
No,
that we talk
I
about a lot.
I think that's really important. Also, I feel like as your role as an executive, when you know that you have people on your team that are subject matter experts, they hold different responsibilities. You also empower them to say, yes, like you are the leader of this project, or you're like, you are passionate about this. So you should definitely run with it. And then how can I support you? Which I think is really important to leadership. But one of the things that you definitely, and you mentioned at the top of the call as well, like would like to discuss and are passionate about is that culture transformation piece. And I'm sure
Yeah.
over this past year at Resident, there's just been a lot of shifts. Can you talk a little bit about how you've really done culture transformation over this past year and what maybe long lasting changes you're seeing kind of for the future?
Sure. This is probably like my favorite question ever, Christina, and I don't even know where to start with some points, but I'm gonna start out and then kind of like zoom in,
Yeah.
because I think it's a better lead in. So I am incredibly passionate about culture, and I think specifically culture transformation, and how do you get to that, like how do you get to specific company cultures in it doesn't even matter what company, and it is very different. So one at Resident, we pride ourselves. If you ask, like we have a fantastic, put my hand on my heart, like we have a fantastic culture. Um, Three words to describe us over and over again that we've seen in surveys are fast paced, challenging, and exciting. I think those are three incredible words that absolutely talk about, um, kind of the passion and the laser, and being laser focused and making sure that we're giving our best overall. But in terms of culture, if you asked any single HR practitioner at the beginning of January 2020 what was on your radar, I guarantee you nobody would have said, the new future of work, of like remote work, remote
Right.
work offices. Even last year in 2020, as we know, was a very still, very tense, heated moments with, race relations, and making sure that companies were doing their best to make sure that their company, was definitely in a safe space.
Absolutely.
So that wellness, mental health, well-being, not to say, and I want to be very careful to say that I'm not discounting them, but if you ask any HR person what was on their radar, it was there, but it really wasn't in the forefront. So
For sure.
my recommendations for company culture transformation and all that, and I think what we have done really well is that we were able to pivot so quickly, after, what was it, March 13th. I'm going to say in New York specifically, March 13th was
That's the day.
probably
Me
like
too.
the
Yes.
day, right?
Yeah.
Like the day. It's going to be 20 years from now where everybody, it's be like, where were you the day before the world just turned upside down, and just like it was just like a movie scene. But for us, it was March 13th. Just to give some other background here too, we had just finished putting like the final touches on what we were considered like the New York office headquarters.
Yeah. Oh, no.
You know, and we had all our beds kind of like laid out,
Right.
kind of like a showroom. We had people in the office. I think we had a board meeting that day. And you just like many New Yorkers specifically, like there was just some like, you know, even though the virus was already ravaging throughout the city, there was this like, I think everybody remembers vividly, you know, like thoughts that were going through their head, and thoughts that, you know, like we'll be back in 2 weeks. I'll just take, you know, I'll just take this, that, you know, and this. But in terms of culture, we were able to shift so quickly. So if March 13th was the last day in the office for us, I remember it was probably a week later that we had a company all hands. And while I know some companies that were struggling, you know, just to like, do we have enough computers? What is this thing called Zoom or Slack? And like, how do you do that? We had actually started out as a remote environment. So for us, that DNA of being remote was already there. And so we were able to shift so quickly back into like remote, you know,
That's great.
remote working, that I honestly believe, and I don't say this lightly, it kind of gave us like we were ready, like, well, you know, a perfect example to say, like, well, people were still trying to build a boat, of like, how are we going to navigate these new waters? We were already on the boat, you know, like we were
Yeah.
ready, like we were ready sailing. And I don't say that lightly, but I do feel as though like we were ahead of the game in there, because I want to say this preparedness that had been born in our DNA since our, you know, since the start of the company. We had always been a remote workforce. We are probably should have said this before, like we are about we are 200 something employees across the globe.
Yeah.
We are in 33 states. We have office hubs in New York, the West Coast in San Francisco, the UK in Tel Aviv. But we are a global outfit. And so for us, our culture means that it is not just born in one city or one geography. It is all encompassing. So for us, and to answer your question, Christine, like in culture, like we were able to shift back pretty quickly, and no longer are there. If you ask folks what makes their company great, like something that always driven me nuts, like culture is not about, it's not about ping pong and foosball and like free lunches. And while those are definitely cool and perks, like folks don't stay at companies because of that. You know, you stay because you want a culture that is going to challenge you. You want to be in a culture that like, this is exciting, and you want to wake up every single day excited, like, how am I going to move the needle on this? And you have to want to be fast paced. Like if I ask an interview, is like, do you want a fast paced environment? Who's going to say like, actually, no, I prefer something
Actually, no.
incredibly,
Slow.
incredibly slow. So there are ways that we kind of interview and see if that's going to be the right fit. But if I kind of look across the org, and I look at all the folks in our teams, like, man, like we have assembled like A teams across there. And it's because we are all laser focused on the same three goals in mind. And to me, that is what drives culture. And while it is definitely a taste of fun, because like, you know, companies need to be fun, you want to do good work, and you want to give it your all. And every day, like I wake up and I'm like, it's gonna be my A game. And I may not have like the best days sometimes, but like for us, it's just incredibly exciting to build. And I never thought I would be in a company where I'm like, holy cow, like just, you know, like seeing like growth and growth trajectory, and just, you know, seeing us doing just like really well in the marketplace. And we don't take that for granted. I think there's just
Right.
something incredibly extraordinary about like, this is how you build a culture.
No, absolutely. I think that's great. And that was definitely a holistic answer, like to the question, because there are a lot of different pieces to it. But I think you're right. At the end of the day, people stay at companies because they feel they're making a difference. They enjoy the work they're doing, and it's the people as well. Another part of culture, especially from a manager perspective and leadership perspective too, is employee engagement, right? So from a
Yeah.
global perspective, across time zones, across roles, employees are looking for different things at the end of the day. They're in different points of their life, different responsibilities. How do you think about really holistic employee engagement, and really measuring that across your growing team too?
So employee engagement is probably my second favorite thing to talk about.
Right.
So I remember early when I started, so my kind of, my, my recommendation for any HR leader going into a new company, one, you cannot, you can't go and activate and think, I'm going to do X, Y, Z without listening first. And I know that sounds so incredibly like, of course not, but like, I can't tell you, like, I think it's, you have to get a sense of what is the, like, what are the top three things that are keeping the company up at night? What are the top three things that are keeping senior leaders up at night, keeping CEOs up at night, keeping the employees? And I got to tell you, it's going to be a mixture of everything. Right. And for me, there's no way to have great employee engagement unless, one, like you do, you survey. You know, you get pulse checks. You're listening, and so we pride ourselves on having a very strong feedback culture. We talk about it a lot, and for us, it's the only way that we can grow. It's the only way that we can just say that we're listening, and so we take that very seriously. So before the pandemic, I launched, you know, an HR climate survey with like many different areas, and there are many different areas to focus on. Like, let's see what we can, you know, here are the top three things that we're going to work on. Here are the top three things that we're, you know, that we do really well. Top three things that, you know, maybe need a little help. And you got to hold, you know, you have to hold leadership accountable for it as well. And just like the last thing you want to do is have a survey and like, right, here are the results. Back it up.
Right.
There's nothing more meaningful than showing by action. And even if there isn't anything that's being taken, like reiterating that often enough, like, you know, it's on the plan, it's on the map. So for me, you cannot have employee engagement unless, one, like you're getting meaningful feedback and data from what your folks are like, from what your folks are saying. So we lead. So for me, it is kind of the North Star and kind of like my roadmap of how I activate. And I have to say that shifted a lot over the course of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And even right now, in terms of employee engagement, I was talking with my team this the other day, even from like an onboarding standpoint, we were, you know, I want to say that in my HR team, we say we have great communication. We know exactly what's going on. And then every so often, like, oh my God, how did we miss how did we miss that? Yeah. And yet we pride ourselves on being good listeners. So the perfect example of that is like even onboarding. And while, you know, when you think of onboarding with new employees, of like, right, you come into work on day one, and then like somebody's there to kind of lead you around, or you go out to lunch, you know, with your coworkers and your boss, and then, you know, it's that experience has, I think, for the most part, with companies, it's shifted and it's changed. And in an area of Slack, or, you know, Slack like models, and doing remote, you have to be incredibly intentional about reaching out to folks. Like there no longer are you going to have these like water cooler moments where you're just going to like bump into someone. And you know, it doesn't mean that like you have to be active on Slack every 2 minutes and just like, hey, look at pictures of my cat or my dog, and just like, and I have to, you know, and I have to say we do a really good job of making sure we do have like kind of channels on Slack where it's, you know, it's we can get glimpses of folks outside of work. Mm-hmm. But for me, engagement starts with listening, and it starts with like looking at data. Like I think a trait of any good HR practitioner is like you need to measure by data. Like you have to measure by data, and like that's it. And while you need to listen, you know, your key stakeholders aren't going to accept an answer like, I talked to this person, that person, and this is what they said. That's fine, but you got to show it on, you know, you have to show this on metrics. Like here's the pulse, like here is the pulse check. Here's exactly what it looks like at a glance. This is how you engage. This is how you talk to key stakeholders. This is how you show, like, this is the pulse checks that we're doing right now. Here is what they're like, here is what they're feeling. So for me, that is the secret sauce of any good employee engagement model. And it's shifting, and it's not the same. I think last year too, if I look back, while everybody was in this new age of like Zoom and Zoom fatigue. And like we had funny hat days, like we were doing like show your pets on the screen, and then that gets old like after a while. And
It does.
you know what?
Well
And that
intentioned.
exactly. And so, you got to keep up. And I think if the new future of work, specifically the employee engagement, has taught us anything, that it changes even with CDC guidelines, and just like, with masks, no masks and all that. And like, you have to be agile. You have to, consistently just like, be flexible. And
Right.
I got to tell you, like, the goals that I kind of set out to, like, have changed and shifted, just because like you have to keep, you have to stay abreast, but also not be so rigid in the way that you think company culture and engagement is going to go. So
Absolutely. And I think when you are being dynamic and you are thinking about how you continually can grow as the company grows, and also employees as they're changing all of the time as well, in terms of where they are in their personal lives, and just like in the world in general, because everyone's going through the human experience together, you're going to make some mistakes, and just like acknowledge it, you move on. There's that quote, better, you do better, by Maya Angelou. This is more general, so it doesn't have to be at resident homes specifically, but in your experience, what are common mistakes you see folks make when they're trying to execute culture transformation that doesn't happen overnight, but maybe they are well-intentioned, it just doesn't land?
yeah, and for me, there's a couple moving parts that need to be in lockstep, otherwise it's going to fail. And so for me, and just kind of my recommendations of what does good company culture and employee engagement look like, there isn't one set template. From that, like, just because this worked at company X does not mean it's going to work at company Y. And I've seen that over and over again. And I have to say, even from experience, like, oh wow, it could be as simple as, when I was at this company, they loved breakfast on Fridays, and it was like bagels. And now, I get this from, like, they hate bagels. And so it doesn't mean, and so if I would just, and I use food as it, because, food is such a light example, and that's the thing, like, it doesn't mean that it's just like one set template that's going to work, and to move the dial. And if you, as an HR person, if you are going to go into that mindset, like, nope, it worked here and it worked out fine, so it's absolutely going to work out here, it's destined for failure. So that's why I say, like, you have to listen. This is why, like, do these engagement, like, surveys, and for me, surveys can be like, we do lengthy surveys, like we do formal lengthy surveys annually. So we carve off on a couple buckets that are important to us, but we've also done surveys that are 3 questions, like, what did you like about this all hands? What did you not like? Any feedback? Like, people always have 2 seconds. And so we gather feedback from there. So for me, the best answer to that, which I am floored when I see folks that don't do it, like, you have to be agile. You can't just go in just like, it worked here. Now you can take that template and you can absolutely mold and shift it. Like, all right, I'm going to use this, but this is what I'm hearing from the leadership team, from the employees, and I'm going to put that, there. That is the secret sauce. So that's one part. But then also it's leadership buy-in, right? Because while I think HR in general, we will always be these cultural stewards and these ambassadors of, like, branding for a company, and that's great and all, but you also have to have this from the leadership team plus everybody else. And so for me, that culture and that engagement and the employee engagement there it absolutely weaves through in every single level of the company. So if you don't have leadership buy-in and it's just like one person that's doing, or maybe a group, I truly believe in leading from example. And I am so fortunate to be at a company that we believe in the same, like, we have a leadership team that is, very locked in how we want to, we want our employees to look to and to model. And so for me, it's like leading by example. And if you don't have buy-in from senior leadership, and we're not talking about this at a leadership level at all hands meetings, it's going to fail. I've seen that time and time again. And so I feel very fortunate that at Resident, we truly see eye to eye on what makes a great employee experience, it starts from the top. And it starts from the top saying, it's okay, this is what we're going to do. And it's such a simple, but to me, incredibly impactful way that I think some people I've seen as a miss sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big proponent of leadership modeling as well, whether it's with culture transformation more generally or with a specific initiative, with diversity, equity, and inclusion being a priority for the company, with even taking time off and prioritizing mental health. If you have like unlimited PTO, 20 days off, whatever it is, but nobody from leadership takes off or your manager, it does send
Totally. Yeah.
signals. So I definitely think that's important. Speaking of, diversity, equity, and inclusion too, this is a huge part of company culture. You mentioned over this past year, so many companies have engaged in corporate social justice, speaking out against racism and really trying to support, acknowledge, and be there for their employees. Can you tell us a little bit about how Resident is thinking about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say that one of our core values is inclusion. So having that, and even when I was interviewing, and they talked heavily, our senior leaders talked heavily about our core values, and specifically with inclusion. For me, that was not that I wasn't sold already. I'm like, this is amazing. This is amazing. So the fact that like inclusion has always been a part of, I want to say, our North Star has been, incredibly, just that sense that it was there, even before all the events of 2020, specifically with racial tension, well, these racial tensions specifically in the US, like, nope, inclusion has always been there. To backtrack a little too with micro, I've always, I am so fortunate to have worked with incredible mentors and leaders who, and as an Asian American woman too, it is something that it is in my DNA to always like fight just fight the good fight, but then also talk and listen. So at Resident, we one, I could talk about this forever, because I don't even know where to start, but a couple things that we've done, specifically in the events of last year in George Floyd. Like, one of the things that I think we did early enough was like, what we know, and we know that there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yep.
And we want to do something, but right. I think, like, where to start was always like, I think something that most companies like, well, where do we start? Where do we do with this? And I think for us, like, we started with an internal committee that we still have that's going. It was like, we just want to hear different voices. Mm-hmm. We want to hear different experiences. We want to have a place that everybody comes together and anybody from the company can join. So that's one thing that we did. But then two, also, we say this a lot, like, we're very cognizant of the fact that, like, we don't want to in a year, like, yep, we're DI good, yep, like, because it's like more than,
we're done with that.
Exactly, we're done with that. And it's for us, like, this is going to be an evolving process, and we talk about that a lot, and we say, like, there are many things that we don't know, there's many things that we're still learning, but for us, it's listening. We have, we look at DEI in terms of a couple buckets. There's definitely education and an education piece. There's also partnerships and giving back, and like giving back to communities. Mm-hmm. There's recruiting and making sure, that our company looks like, the population that we're serving and selling mattresses to. And, and then there's also, the look forward of, like, what do we want to look like? And so for us, it's evolving. It's something that, we even and as a side note to that, it's something that, like, we even put, like, mental health and mental health awareness into it. It's so broad. So we put mental health and awareness into that bucket too, because it's while, at the end of the day, our mission is to sell we sell mattresses, but we also, like, these are our beliefs. We believe that we should have a company where people are free to speak their, we talk about inclusion, and inclusion meaning it's a safe space. So if you want to challenge, that's totally fine. and that's okay. And that's okay. And we have culture awards every month at our all hands where, you know, we like these folks have embodied these values that we have. And so for us, it's more than, you know, it's something that we say it's going to evolve. And we do not look at DEI as something that, you know what, at the end of 2022, you know, we're going to, because you know, there's still many moving pieces of it, from recruiting, you know, from metrics, from education, from teaching, from like mental health, from partnerships, from going out to like different communities that, you know, we have started, but by no means are we you know, complete, if that makes sense.
I think that definitely goes back to your earlier point, as well as being, you know, agile and making sure that you're looking towards the long game here, in terms of change is not going to happen overnight. And also this work is always going to be changing and shifting, and you're going to need to, you know, start different initiatives and fill all the different buckets that you were talking about: community, internal, education. If there's just there's a lot going on. So I definitely, I think that's really important, that it's one of the core values from the start of inclusion, to have that foundation as well.
For sure, for sure.
I guess looking towards the future as well, I know you talked a little bit about just the future of work and being able to adapt. Is there a trend that you're seeing that individuals and companies really need to hone in on in order to be successful in the future?
Sure. And, you know, it also ties into DEI a lot, plus with the future work and even like roadmaps from last year, but mental health and mental health awareness. And again, if you asked anybody at the beginning of January 2020, sure, you know, and it's not that it was just kind of like on the side, but it is truly on the forefront. And so I say mental health and well-being because it does tie into what this new future of work is. And if there's any lasting legacies from the pandemic, this, you know, this blending of home and life right now, it's, you know, it's like, I look at the, you know, I see your bookshelf in the back and I see a little taste of like, you are Christina, like you see my mirror here, you know, you see my mirror here. But you know, it's interesting because if you see like a cat or a dog or a child, or like kind of like run through any Zoom screens, it's no big deal anymore, you know. And I think if like, even I think 2 years ago, in any kind of video format, not that that would have been taboo, exactly, but it would be like, shh, just like don't mind that in the background. So there is the getting glimpses of people at home, and it's hard, you know, it's hard. We will never go back to a just office as we know it. I don't even like saying the word office because it has this connotation of, I don't, you know what I mean? It's just, it's almost like an outdated concept. So we like to look at New York, our New York, I want to say like, even though I'm going to say office, you know, almost like collaboration spaces. And for me, like that's on the forefront. So mental health, right? And so like I was reading something the other day, and it's so true that in the early days of the pandemic, people were saying like, oh, you know, I gained an hour by not traveling into work, and I gained an hour and back by not traveling again. But what's going on? Like people are doing meetings like back to 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 back. You know, like that's there. Like it's so, you know, and companies are wrestling with that of like, how do you, you know, what is that balance? Mental health too is something that we are, you know, incredibly passionate about. And for us, everything starts with a good night's sleep. If people don't have a good night's sleep, you know, like we can't, like, how are we going to go out and function? So we've done prescriptive things, you know, we do like wellness challenges, and for us, like having like healthy lifestyles, and we try to do a lot of employee engagement. Like there's something to that, you know, and I think there's something where I think for us, and something that has set us apart too, that I think most companies like have to, is that, you know, there's what work looks like in the office can no longer be rigid. You know, like we believe in, like, we're not going to, because we are a global office, it's not like 8 o'clock we start, right? And then like 5 o'clock we end. We are all over. But I think what sets us apart is like, you know what? Go do good work. Like, and that's all we like, that our expectation is that do good work. We're going to expect that you're going to deliver, but it's not going to be on this, like, you know, this one time frame. Now you have to put some rules around it. Like you can't, you know, like we try not to have crazy meetings. So one end of the globe is getting screwed in the
Right,
other, because, and
absolutely.
so you have to have those parameters.
Yeah,
But I think going back to my point earlier, just like being flexible and being agile and just like really staying on top of on top of trends. Like my heart goes out to when I hear some of my HR colleagues that are wrestling with things like, oh, our mandate is that we have to be everybody in the office September 1st. That's it. And
mhm,
when you do not give that flexibility, and because life and work have blended in so much together, it's here to stay. And if you don't stay on top of that, specifically with like building a good culture, like you're going to lose out on great people. I think another thing too is like now the talent base has opened up, and while we've always been remote and we've always prided ourselves on getting talent wherever in the country, the borders have opened. It's no longer like New York centric or San Francisco centric, and we're finding like folks from all over, which is just it's fantastic. My team is in Kentucky and in Pennsylvania and in Portland, Oregon, but we make an intentional effort to make sure that we get together. like even though I talk to them every day, and so you do have these water cooler moments now because we're being more intentional about it. So to answer your question again, with like just kind of trends in the forefront, like this future of work is more like the future of life, and it's the future of life and work kind of melding together, that companies need to, it's here to stay. And I think it's a cool thing. I never thought I would be a fully remote person. I actually
me
enjoy
neither.
like going to the office, like
Yeah,
I actually enjoy going to the office. I enjoy it, and it's been a
I
shift.
enjoy chatting,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's been definitely a shift. And so while I think even the terminology, like there is something more engaging about using the term collaboration space, like when you need it, like
Right,
if you need it, that I think is incredibly appealing to a candidate, when they're
100%.
looking for a job or what they're looking for in a company.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think so. And it's something that you're right, it's here to stay. Other companies are really thinking, and these are large organizations, it's across the board. So really thinking about meeting employees with what they're thinking about for the future. And it's about looking at someone as a full human in life, like you were
Right.
saying. So I don't know. I know you mentioned a couple of times it all starts with a good night's sleep. I definitely think that's something I have learned over time, and I value my sleep a lot more. But if something was keeping you up at night, what does keep you up at night?
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. And for me, it's, I always want, like, at the end of the day, my role as in the people section is to make sure that like managers are having, like, they're having great teams. And sometimes I'll have conversations with managers during the day, and it's just like, here's a problem that we have to, that we have to wrestle. What keeps me up at night? Like, are we moving fast enough? Like, I'm waking up because I'm like thinking of one thing, which maybe by minutia, but what kind of impact is going to trickle, is it going to
Yeah,
trickle down the line? um, I think in HR, and I think in HR, if anything, you have to be 10 steps ahead. And so for
mhm,
me, it's like, if there's another superpower, I'm like, am I being 10 steps ahead on something? Because I know how this is going to play. I know this is how it's going to play out. And so
mhm.
it's up to us as these uh, performance management whisperers, just to make sure that we're connecting the dots, that we're making, that we're making sure that like on the back end everything is taken care of. But we're also kind of leading the charge with a strategy ahead from that people side, and just like, what, this is what we're going to do to have the best employee systems in place, so people can put like the best work, and like, are people happy? And I think it goes back, it almost goes back to these teaching moments when I was a teacher, and I still have this. I'm like, do they get it? Is this, am I
Yeah.
not, like, it's like, I believe in good teachers. I'm like, did this resonate? And so for me, nothing is more, and I say this a lot, like my greatest joy is when these aha moments come about, with my employees, or even employees, and you can just kind of like see it, like, or they got it, and
Yeah.
just like, in how do you make that shift? And so for me, it's just making sure that we are always 10 steps ahead in the game, because it is on us. And I think if the last year has taught us anything, HR leaders are like, we were at the forefront, like
Mhm.
they leaned on, like, and I say they, meaning, and I'm just not talking about resident in general, but you look at companies, with definitely this new office life, and with DEI, mental health and well-being, it all came back to HR. All did. And it's a great, I think it's great to kind of put us in the spotlight there, but now it's about activating. And now it's about like, right, like this is why we always want to see this, like this is why we've always like pushed away to have a seat at the table. And I think there's this incredible transformation that's going out in HR now. I love nothing more than we have interns or talking about to somebody of having a career in HR. And I'm like, yes, this is why HR is so great. This is why HR is so great. And even like when I tell folks like, oh, then, they're like, oh, I didn't know that's what HR did. Like, I think it's our moment in the sun. And I think there is still so much that, that we're going to do that is, it's extraordinary in my opinion. And it's the fact that it's just been evolving so much over the past 20 years, and more so over the last year, is just, it's incredibly cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way of the future, there's a lot of opportunities to be creative, especially in HR and people teams. And in these conversations all of the time, people say that they were looking to their people leaders to solve anything and everything. And I think that
Yes.
it's a really interesting opportunity to impact the business as well. I know we ranged the gamut from our conversation today. Was there anything I didn't ask that you want to share, or a key takeaway that you want to re-emphasize for the folks who are listening?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. So I guess my biggest takeaway, and for HR leaders out there, is just like, keep your ears to the ground, listen and listen. And when I say listen, I think of course the automatic response is like, of course I'm a great listener. But I have to say, I was one of the best teaching moments that I had as the student here. We were going through this training, and the lecture was basically telling, like, as leaders we have to listen, and it's so hard not to jump in and just to start talking.
Mm-hmm.
And I try, and for me it's something like, yeah, you have to listen, because sometimes for me that is the trait of any good HR person. And I can't tell you what a small but impactful trait that is, because
Yeah.
without it, you're not going to have good culture. You're not going to have good employee engagement, and you are definitely not going to move the dial on some initiatives if you're not really listening to what your stakeholders are saying, what your board is saying, what your leadership is saying, but most importantly, what the people are saying. So be a good listener.
Be a good listener, be
takeaway.
an active listener, an empathetic listener, and then be
Yeah.
able to make those data-driven decisions with all of the feedback you're able to get from folks. It was so nice to meet
Absolutely.
you. Thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture and sharing your experience and what has really inspired you to be in the space and lead the team at Resident. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's been a pleasure, and I really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Yes, absolutely. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, AllVoices believes in the empowerment of everyone to speak up at an organization and thinks it's a requirement for everyone to succeed. We'll speak soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.